Welcome to this next episode of the Best Fleets podcast. I am super excited today to be joined by Deen Albert from Grand Island Express. How are you, sir?
Doing great, Rick. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
so Deen is the director of operations at Grand Island. And before we jump into it, can you give me like the 30-second elevator pitch on what Grand Island does?
Sure. Yeah. We're a carrier about 170 strong right now. We service about 38 states, all going east of Nebraska for the most part, and we really stick heavily to the I-80 corridor. We're refrigerated, so we're hauling a lot of beef and pork out of Nebraska.
Cool.
Mhm.
So I also know that you are a Best Fleets Hall of Famer,
Mhm.
3 years running, and in the Best Fleets, what, 13 years now?
13 years. Yeah.
13
Yeah.
years. And
Yeah.
so clearly there's got to be a reason for that. And my idea here today is for any company that is just getting into the Best Fleets program and they're thinking, oh yeah, I could do that. By the end, when I go through all the different things that Grand Island does, they're going to be like, oh, okay, I've got a little work to do before I catch up to them. But
Mhm.
but in terms
Mhm.
of best practices, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, and I think there are like four different levels that you use to make sure that your drivers have a great workplace experience. And I noticed there's a video on your website, and in it, one of your drivers says, "This is one of the most organized companies I've ever worked for."
Mhm.
But organized doesn't necessarily mean stiff.
Right.
So how do you find the balance between, obviously being organized, but also being flexible enough to
Yeah.
sort of evolve and move around?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, some of that goes back to our size. We're kind of in a sweet spot for fleet size, where drivers have direct access to me and to the owner, and so we invite them to do that from day one, to say, hey, we know whatever we're doing today might not work tomorrow because trucking changes that fast, and we need to hear that. And we can pivot to that really quickly. So yeah, hopefully we do come off organized to our drivers, but they know that this is as much their company as it is anyone else's.
Right. And there was actually, I think it was you in that video who said, "We know we're not perfect, and that's
Mhm.
actually the opportunity to think about what we can do
Yeah.
better." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we kind of grade ourselves on change and being able to evolve, and part of that is going back to knowing, hey, we've always got something to work on.
Right.
Mhm.
So let me get into that first level of what I would call direct value to drivers. And these are the
Mhm.
things that, like, any driver, if you ask them off the street, hey, what would be good to have in a company, they're going to kind of list these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have a kind of guaranteed pay
Mhm.
for when drivers are starting out. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're fairly unique in the way we administer it. We used to just do a straight across the board guaranteed pay at the same rate, for every driver. What we kind of noticed was, we had that maybe 10% of drivers that were starting to sunset their career and maybe wanting to slow down a little bit, and then we had that 85-90% of drivers that really wanted to get as many miles as they could and make as much money as they can, and that's what you would expect out of a typical driver. So we had two situations happen. When something bad would happen to their week, like a load got canceled or they had a breakdown or something like that, we'd know that, hey, we've got you covered on guaranteed pay. Don't worry about it. And then our drivers would, the ones that really wanted to get out there and make a lot of money, saying, hey, that's great, but I took a cut in pay this week. And then you had that 10% that were saying, hey, this is great, I got a raise, and nothing really happened. So
But okay.
so now we scale it, and it goes off of each individual driver's pay average, and we recompute that annually, so that as their wages go up, their benchmark goes up too.
I imagine they're all pretty happy with that.
Yeah, yeah, they all like that. Yeah, yeah.
Now, I don't know if I read this correctly, but there was something in here about how um, fleet managers have a budget to decide on how to incentivize or reward drivers. Do I
Hmm.
do I have that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the fleet managers do that.
They do. Yeah, they have a I guess I would call it a slush fund or whatever, but we have an average per driver that they can spend every year, and it goes into just an internal account that the drivers can cash out of any time. Many of our drivers don't even know that that's there, but they know it's there when the fleet manager says, "Hey, thanks for helping out on this. Here's X amount of dollars."
Huh. I I don't know if I've heard of that before.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
and to give them that flexibility,
Hmm.
pretty smart. Okay.
Hmm.
Now I was going through the results book. I also noticed that you all got top marks on facilities, including the recent work you're doing on expanding the women's facilities. Just the giant list of things
Hmm.
available.
Yeah.
Was it always that way, or did this sort of slowly develop over time?
No, I think it developed over time. I mean, one thing that our drivers are good at, because I think we condition them to do it, is to give us those suggestions, and expanding the women's facilities, that was a big consistent suggestion we've gotten in the last year or two, and of course it's a big undertaking, but as we're trying to pull more women into the industry, we recognize that they need to have their own space, and so it's been a pretty long project, but we finally kind of got there, and our female drivers are pretty happy with it. So yeah, it's just been a progression of driver suggestions and what we can do to make their life a little easier.
Right. And that includes, so you've also got like healthy snacks, and you've also got health screening, access to RNs, cost support for putting a fit system in the trucks, like bang, 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 bang.
Yeah. 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 Wellness is one of our core values, and anything we can do to support our drivers in gaining physical wellness, mental wellness, financial wellness, those are the things we want to pursue.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So another company is looking at that and they're thinking, all right, well, that's a lot of things you're giving drivers. Cool, I can do that.
Hmm.
The next level though, I was thinking about how you think about helping drivers be more efficient. So load feedback really jumped out at me. Right.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, so drivers are able to put messaging in on a load or a shipper or receiver, and say, hey, this went right, this went wrong, and we're able to receive those messages. But we've also added some more layers of driver feedback, where we're pretty interactive with the driver's Facebook page, so we glean some information from that, and we're also right now rolling out a product called Storyboard Chat. And that is a completely hands-free way for drivers to interact directly with management at any time of the day. So it comes back as a messaging, but the drivers can speak into it, and it'll translate that not only in English but in about 30 different languages, so the drivers can understand it if English isn't their first language, and it will actually use our individual voices and talk in other languages. So it's pretty impressive.
Now, is that an app on their tablet or?
Yes. Yeah, it's an app on their tablet. We're actively working with Storyboard Chat to fine tune it even more. But literally, they don't touch their tablet. They just say check and say message dispatch, and they'll talk into it. And if they're speaking Spanish, for instance, if it's set to do it, it'll translate it back to English for our dispatcher. So,
Wow.
mhm.
Wow. Okay. And that's fairly recent that you rolled that out.
Yeah, we've been in the process of rolling it out since last fall. We helped develop it with Storyboard, and it's a product they're actively selling now. But we're kind of their leading edge company, so they're constantly kind of running things past us.
Man, that is cool.
Yeah,
Um, there was a phrase you used in here when you're bringing folks on, no cookie cutter job offers.
right.
What does that mean?
Well, so I feel like we approach recruiting a little bit differently than some companies. We train our recruiters really hard on on making sure they have the accurate information. So, members of our management team might sit with the recruiters and just listen to their phone calls, and if a policy or procedure might have changed, we'll correct them on that so that they have that accurate information. And then we train our recruiters to be really consultative in their approach, much like we would train a salesperson, in asking a lot of questions of our candidates. First, to find out if we're a good fit for them, but then second, to get some information about what a job offer would look like and what speaks loudly to that candidate. Of course, we have to make that fall within our policies, but we may change the structure of what that offer looks like depending on what's most important to the candidate.
Hmm. You said something there that I've heard of in a couple of other places, but mostly from folks who are like in the Hall of Fame or in the top 20.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit about managing expectations, but it's also about finding the right fit. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there who are just like, get them in, get working for me, there you go.
Yeah.
But to pause and say, I know you want this job, I want to hire you, but there's this additional piece. Let's make sure that we're the right fit.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And is that like a value match, or just like a basic job expectation match, or?
It is. It's a value match. So when hiring a driver, we want to make sure they're a good driver, right? But beyond that, we want to make sure that they're a good fit for the culture of our company, and just an all around good employee. And the goal with that is to say, okay, I don't just want to hire you. I want you to retire with us. And so turnover is a big issue in our industry. But even if it wasn't, it's, to me, it's not worth hiring somebody unless we intend to support them through retirement. And I think it shows a commitment on our part, but it also asks for a commitment from that potential candidate as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So managing expectations and making sure it's a right fit, fantastic. We've got that second level. Here's the third one that I'm really the third level of kind of support for drivers. And it's a little more subtle, and these aren't necessarily things that if you were to ask drivers, they'd be like, okay, this is on my list. Here's one: cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we do the Best Leads program, we sometimes get people saying, why are you grading us on cybersecurity? This is about drivers.
Mm-hmm.
And what I say to them is, if you get hacked and your entire payroll system is locked down by ransomware, are your drivers going to get paid on time?
No.
Exactly. And so it's going to matter. But drivers will never, if you're doing it right, drivers will never know.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got, quite obviously, we're not going to go into the details, quite an impressive list of ways that you pay attention to that.
Yeah.
That too, has that evolved over time, or did you hit a moment where you're like, oh, we're in trouble, we need to put all these things in place now?
I think there's been a slow involvement up until the last maybe 3 or 4 years, and then we kind of supercharged our focus in that area, and I think that was just response to the growing number of targets there are in the trucking industry that we were just seeing happen around us, and we don't want that to happen. So we put a lot of measures in place, and that changes over time. And even in the 3-4 years that we've put a lot of focus on it, we've gone from one solution to the next level of solution to the next level of solution, just because hackers are crafty, and they're changing and evolving.
Kind of
So we have to
one-upmanship.
do that. Yeah. So this will be a process that we continue to look at all the time. But what I think is cool about it is that we've found ways to involve our drivers as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, the drivers have a lot of technology at hand, and it can be hacked as well. And so we have now provided training on tablets that that helps with that, and those videos continue to push out so the drivers understand, what they can do to prevent it.
The number of companies that I've spoken to across the industry who that really is a blind spot for them. That yeah, they got loads of cybersecurity, but it's just about business continuity, just about the terminal, and totally missing that other piece.
Yeah.
Both in terms of the technology they're using, that is a potential entry point, but also on the personal level, right? If you can train them on what phishing attacks look like, even in their personal life, if they get hacked, it's going to impact their work and their
Yes.
life and all those things.
Yeah.
So thank you. And anyone else watching this, pay attention, train your drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's another interesting thing. Something like 32% of your drivers are vets.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
was that a targeted outreach, or is this more like once you have a few, word starts to get around the Grand Island is kind of a good place for folks from the military?
Yeah, I think that is sort of how it evolved for us. We've done some targeted outreaches before. I would say, when we're in those more formalized programs, we have a limited success with it. But when we allow our interaction with the vets to grow organically, and that's exactly what happens. Our name gets out there, and then more vets are reaching out that, hey, this company is going to take care of you. We have opportunities for them to serve outside of the normal trucking realm that we work closely with Reads Across America, and we always name drivers to that. So hopefully for veterans we show that we're serving a little higher purpose, and we certainly want to support them.
Amazing. Here's one I can guarantee I have not seen before: generational training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had to read that a couple times. Okay, what is that?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I'm getting some gray hair on me here. So, when, the talk first started coming out about millennials, we really started to do some research around that, okay, the generations there's some significant differences in there, and what speaks loudly to each generation, and now we're getting into 1 and 2 generations past millennials that are coming into the workforce, and their upbringing is completely different from what mine was, and so for our fleet managers to interact with them is really, really important. Also recognizing that we've got some young fleet managers, so how does a driver that may be twice their age interact with them, and what's the best way to communicate? And so we're trying to understand and recognize those differences so that we have respect for that, but B, just learning different ways to communicate, learning that younger generations don't always like a phone call. They do like the technology, right? So sometimes, speaking into our storyboard chat might be the best way to communicate with them.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And full disclosure, when I was born, the Vietnam War was still going on. So yeah, I got you. And so it's for anyone watching, it's that kind of out of the box thinking, because there are lots of people who've been in the industry for a long time who are going to say, wow, the young folks, they don't like this, and I don't really figure it out. And you take the next step and say, okay, so let's figure that out. Let's figure out how we can bridge that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty easy for an older generation to kind of shake their head at the younger generations, but I mean, let's face it, the hippies grew up and ran the world too, right? So we're all going to grow up, and we need to respect that. So
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah.
And then you've also got some cool innovations.
Yeah.
This was interesting to me. Are you still piloting Mirror Eye on some of your some of your trucks?
We completed that pilot, and we're
Mhm.
still considering a larger rollout with it. But we certainly the driver feedback is driving that decision.
Yeah. Okay. All
Yep.
right. Because it is a fascinating bit of technology,
Hmm.
but just a little while ago, I was talking to a brain scientist who studies drivers and technology,
Hmm.
and his big point was see your drivers as a user and make sure that you're getting as much information from them, from your end user, as possible before you make any decisions. So it
Yeah.
seems like you're right on the money
Hmm.
there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So now we're into fourth level of Grand Island. And this, I think, what I will call a culture of responsiveness, feedback all over the place.
Hmm.
So engagement surveys.
Yeah.
Yeah. How often do you do those, and what's kind of in them?
So we've shifted to, I'd say, a little bit more dynamic platform for that than what we used to do. We used to do one large annual engagement survey for our drivers. Now we've gone to engagement surveys in different stages of their employment. So we've got one that's right out of the gate, their first week of employment. We've got one within the first month, and then they start to spread out a little bit more, where all drivers still do an annual survey, but we're catching this information quickly, and we work it right away. So if a driver scores us on a scale of 5, if we get a 3 or below, it causes what's called an intervention, and our senior fleet manager will actually call that driver and say, hey, is there anything we can do to rectify this situation? And it is preventatively helped our drivers avoid thinking about turnover because we're
Hmm.
catching things much earlier.
So you basically set up a tripwire for feedback, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, hmm, yeah,
Love it. Okay. And so you mentioned the Facebook page before, and that's mostly like drivers talking to drivers.
yeah.
You recognize that as a source of
Hmm.
information, right?
Yeah, we're pretty careful with that. Myself and the owner of the company are on that page. All the drivers know that, but we really try to stand back and not not be a referee or anything like that. So if they address something to us directly as a question or something like that, we'll jump right in. If they if there's something that we need to correct from an informational standpoint, we'll just say, hey guys, this is what the case is, and then they continue their conversation. But we really try to stay back from it so that there's an open dialogue, and we've really seen that they're not afraid to put whatever's on their mind out there, and they don't really hear from us very often with it. We love the information, love the collaboration.
So this is interesting. I was talking to a fleet that was not in the Best Fleets program, just at a random show we were at,
Hmm.
and they had said that they had started a feedback mechanism like that,
Yeah.
and they stopped it because it was just a complaint session.
Hmm.
And I didn't say anything, but my thought was, well, that alone tells you something,
Hmm.
right? If they feel like there's lots to complain about, then maybe there's some stuff to work on.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you've got that ability to just stay back and listen, but
Mhm.
then pay attention to that information and move on.
Yeah, yeah, and what's cool is it sort of evolves. So, particularly probably earlier in a driver's tenure, the maybe complaint is the wrong word, but they ask a lot of questions like, "Hey, I wish we had this," or "I wish this happened," or something like that. And then you see a senior driver kind of come in and say, "Hey, guess what? You actually do have that ability, and here's how you do it." And so, it regulates itself in a way that there's not the senior drivers don't allow an assumption to continue. They jump in pretty quick. So
Man. So I'm gonna skip down to something else here. Um, what's the difference between a trainer and a super coach?
yeah, good question. So trainers, we We use them all the time. We're hiring quite a few finishing students. We don't do a lot of CDL training, or don't sponsor a lot of CDL training, but we do bring in fresh CDL graduates and train them for 4 to 6 weeks. So they're in the truck with the trainer for that time, and have certain criteria they have to get through in order to get on their own. A super coach is could be a trainer, but it's a driver that really adheres to all of our policies and procedures, and probably a heavy focus on time delivery. And so when we have a newer driver that's struggling in those areas, and we've coached and things like that, we will assign one of these super coaches that really dive in with them and pick apart, if it's on time delivery issue, how long are your breaks, where are you taking the breaks, strategy type of things that only a driver would really know. And so we've asked them to pair up with some of these folks that just maybe aren't quite getting it yet, so that they can be successful.
Okay, so kind of like a batting coach in baseball. So it's not the general manager, or right, but it's someone very specifically focused on that skill set.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So jumping back a little bit, because you mentioned that so there's this formal process of drivers guiding other drivers, and then the less formal, say on the Facebook page, where an expert driver won't let an assumption go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you've got this culture of information and skill sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've also got the electronic suggestion box.
Yep.
And I'm sure traditionally the suggestion box can be a bit of a black hole, right? Something goes in there, maybe you hear something. But that is not the case here.
Right. Yeah, if we get a suggestion through any of our means of suggestions, and interestingly, the mailbox in the front of our building gets the most traffic. The electronic piece gets used sometimes, but drivers still like to put the slip of paper in the mailbox. And we take those we look in that mailbox every day, but we meet as a management group every Monday, and as long as we've got suggestions, we are working through those during that session. We might assign one particular member of management to follow up on it. But drivers will always get follow-up on it, whether we can do something about it or not. We will explain why we couldn't do something if that's the case.
See, that's an important feedback issue that a lot of people don't actually get, right? Even if the answer is no, explain why.
Yeah, exactly.
Close the feedback loop. Yeah. Okay, here's something I'm super interested in. Very recently, Transport Topics ran an article on lease purchase programs in the industry. And that there is a side of that predatory side that is extremely problematic. But in this article, it really hit on how to do it right, and all the things that would have to go into managing that kind of thing for drivers. Now, you've got things like an owner ops workshop that if a driver comes to you and says, I'm interested in this, you're like, okay, here's the truck, here's the keys, good luck. It's something much more structured. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, we do have a process for it. One is we don't approach it in a way that we're not pushing the lease purchase program. A lot of drivers view that as maybe their next step in their career, and we want to provide career progression that's appropriate for drivers. So that lease purchasing is something that we offer. When we have drivers interested, that's exactly what we do. We say, hey, all right, we're going to schedule an owner operator workshop. Let's plan it about half a day. It's going to take quite a while to get through all the information, and then I'm usually the one that runs that workshop, and we go through the good, bad, and ugly about being an owner. And hopefully by the end of that session, we're able to say, okay, you can either take the next step in this, or if we've scared you off, that's okay. And, we're fine with that. But we want you to have an informed decision. And so, if they take that next step, then the next step is that we actually have an online course that we work through a partner with, that focuses on the business aspect of the owner operator piece. And so that's about a 12-hour course that they complete on their own. So by that time, they've got quite a commitment going into this, and then they can say, okay, I'm ready to take the next step. So then they're researching the available trucks. They're working with our maintenance department to go through the equipment file and make sure that it's something that they want to do. And then once they've identified a truck, we have them drive that as a company driver for 2 to 3 weeks, so that they can say, hey, I need this addressed, or I think this is wrong, or whatever, or say, you know what, I was wrong, I don't think I want this truck. But they have that opportunity. And then they come in for what we call signing day, and they sit down with our owner and sign the lease purchase agreement, get all their financial stuff in order, and then sign the owner operator agreement as well at that time, and move forward as an owner operator.
So your approach to that is the same approach that you have to onboarding, which is like, let's see if this is a fit. Let's look
Yeah,
at the expectations. Let's look at the reality of it.
yeah,
And then, and I'm going to try and scare you off. I'm going to give
yeah,
you, right? I'm not going to sell you possibility. I'm going to show you reality.
yeah.
And if after that you're in, okay, let's build this out for success.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, we explain the freight market as much as we can. We want them to be informed of what this looks like at Grand Island Express versus another company that might pay on percentage or something like that, and how that looks, and where the company takes more risk, and where the driver might take more risk. And we try to explain those things, and really get them to a point where they either feel good or don't feel good about it. But we've never had an owner operator fail for a financial reason. We've had a couple turn in their trucks because they needed to get off the road, for family reasons or whatever, but we've never had one turn it in and say, I can't make it.
That's a big deal.
Yeah,
That's a big deal.
yeah,
And because I think that so many people see the possibility of owning their own business, but the reality of like the dollars and cents and the kinds of attention to detail that I've seen really successful owner operators use, right down to mileage and fuel and all these things.
yeah,
If you're not willing to pay attention to that, you're going to have a bad day.
yeah,
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 love
absolutely.
it.
Hmm.
Love it. So there was one more part of, I think this fits under culture of responsiveness, but you've got an accident review board.
Hmm.
Now, accidents and incidents, obviously they happen.
Yeah.
And in many companies, basically, you get hauled in and you get given the what for and away you go.
Hmm.
But you've got another level here
Yeah,
where there is an assessment. And if that's still not satisfactory, it goes to the review board. Is that right?
correct. Hmm.
Yeah. So who
Yep.
makes up the board?
So we do take one random person from our office, might be out of operations, might be out of a different department, and then the rest of that board gets made up of peer drivers. But the interesting piece is for every appeal that gets heard, that's a different makeup of the board. We don't keep the same drivers or the same personnel on that board. That rotates on really a random basis, so that we always have an even showing of opinions on there.
And I imagine that's well received, even if the driver involved doesn't get the answer they hope for.
Hmm.
At least it's a transparent process. So
It is, and the other benefit I think we see out of it is it gives the drivers that serve on the board a really balanced opinion of how we have to look at an accident, and how we have to make a decision on it. They're going through that same thought process when they're serving on that board and trying to make a decision for their peers. So it gives them a little bit broader perspective of how companies have to hold the line on safety.
yeah. So I also want to spend a couple minutes on Deen Albert.
Okay.
So, how long have you been in the industry, if you don't mind my
Uh,
asking?
sure. Yeah, this is my 25th year in the industry. This is my sixth year at Grand Island Express.
Yeah. Okay. And is there anything that stands out in terms of how the industry has shifted over that time, whether that's, driver expectations or how companies are organized or how people approach the business, whatever that happens to be?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There really have. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is obviously the industry is a lot more regulated than when I started. It was starting to be a little bit more regulated back in 2000 when I started, but we've seen that really ramp up in the last few years, and so it creates some operational constraints that we have to work through. It's frustrating for companies and drivers both, but we get through it, and we make a new normal every single time, and I think that's a big portion of it. And another big difference that I see is, trucking's always had cycles, but obviously this last cycle of a huge boom and a prolonged trough, that makes it a little bit, it changes the game a little bit. Just in the fact that we know that we'll cycle out of it, but the predictability of it is far less than what it used to be as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And hmm, I want to ask a little bit about your own approach to being open to change,
Mhm.
right? Did you your approach to the business and people now,
Mhm.
how has that evolved over time? Because there are
Yeah.
people who start out and they're like, this is the way it is, this is the way it's always going to be, and they're like that for their whole career.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and that is a difficult way to be.
Yeah. I was just speaking at a conference about this because we've implemented some pretty big changes this year in terms of a more automated dispatch process using AI, and we were talking about some of the change management that goes through that. And I'm probably I called myself a little bit of a rare bird that I have this like appetite for change, and I think this is my career progression has sort of caused that. Um, uh, uh, but not everybody's built that way, and so we have to recognize that change is really difficult. And how do we, again, it kind of goes back to how do we speak to each individual to let them know why a change is needed and where we're going with it and what's the end game to it. And so change management is probably more difficult than it ever has been, especially when you come out of cycles where, again, going back to the freight market, when everything seems to be working, and now you're in the cycle where you have to try some different things and adapt to it. It's tough for especially the people who have jumped into the industry during the only thing that they knew was a boom market. So
Absolutely right. I
yeah.
think I think you've hit on the theme of both your own career and Grand Island's success, which is appetite for change. And so that little bit in the video on your website, and the fact that 13 years running, you hit that best fleets list because
Yeah.
you know what you were doing 13 years ago may have been leading edge then, but it may not be today. And
Correct.
so to do that again and again means that you've not locked into one way of doing things, but rather you've got this sense of progression. And the only way you can capture that sense of progression is with an appetite for change.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Deen Albert, I appreciate this. Grand Island Express, congratulations again.
Thank you.
Uh,
Yeah,
and hopefully we'll ding out another one this year.
that'd be great.
Wonderful. I appreciate it, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and we'll see you soon.